going to explain a horror movie called An American Werewolf in London. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens with two American young men named David Kessler and Jack Goodman. They are on a 3-month trip across Europe with plans to visit several major cities such as Paris, Rome, and Berlin. They're currently hitchhiking on a sheep truck through the wild countryside of northern England on their way to Italy. As dusk approaches, the driver pulls over and leaves the boys on a desolate road, explaining that he's going in a different direction. Before departing, he warns the duo to stay off the moors and stick to the road. After this, the boys continue their journey on foot and soon arrive in front of a pub called the Slaughtered Lamb. They then notice the pub sign, which depicts a bloody, decapitated wolf's head with its tongue hanging out, impaled on a sword. When they step inside, the locals abruptly stop what they were doing and stare at them in silence. However, when the two guys place their orders, the locals surprisingly go back to what they were doing before. Moments later, Jack notices a pentagram painted between two candles on the wall. He tells David about it, and both are left curious about its significance. Jack then asks the locals what the symbol means and why it's painted there. Surprisingly, the entire bar falls silent again and stares at them in anger. They seem to be furious for some reason, so they kick the boys out of the pub. As the duo proceeds to leave, the barmaid looks worried and says they can't let them go. However, the pub goers only warn the boys to stay on the road, avoid the moors, and be aware of the full moon. Next, the duo leaves the pub, still shocked by what just happened to them. They keep walking, hoping to find a village where they can rest soon. However, it soon begins to rain heavily, and the fog around them thickens. This causes the boys to stray away from the main road, and eventually become lost. Moments later, they hear ear-piercing howls in the distance, and they become frightened. They decide to return to the pub, but realize they're in the middle of a moor, and are unable to orient themselves. The growling sound grows increasingly louder, and the boys realize that an unknown creature is approaching them. They start running in the opposite direction, but soon a werewolf emerges from the fog and begins to attack Jack. David rushes to his aid, but by this time, Jack has been brutally ripped apart and is nearly dead. Following this, the werewolf turns its attention to David and attacks him, but before the creature can cause any serious damage, the locals arrive and shoot it to death. As he falls unconscious, David notices the dead werewolf transforming into a bloodied, naked man.
"Oh, blimey, I thought that was a squirrel,"
says the hunter. The scene then cuts to 3 weeks later, when David awakens in a hospital in London. He is greeted by a doctor named Hirsch and a man from the American embassy. David inquires about his friend, to which Hirsch reveals that Jack was murdered. According to the official reports, they were attacked by an insane escaped convict. David is distraught over his friend's death and begins to act hysterically, so a nurse named Alex sedates him. Before losing consciousness, he clarifies that it wasn't a madman who attacked them, but a large wolf. When he awakens later, he is visited by two detectives who want to take his statement. David tells them the same story about how they were attacked by a big wolf. However, the detectives don't believe him because two witnesses saw a madman attacking the boys. They reveal that the escaped lunatic's body was discovered, and an autopsy report confirmed that he was the attacker. The detectives now suspect that David's memories are distorted due to severe psychological trauma. In the following scene, David begins to have nightmares in which he sees himself naked, running through the forest and tearing a deer apart with his teeth. When he awakens, Alex urges him to eat some food before taking his pill. David asks her to leave the pill and promises to take it later. However, she refuses and proceeds to feed him like a child. David is touched by this gesture and finds himself attracted to her. Anyone who puts things in my mouth is okay in my books. Later, when he falls asleep again, he has another strange dream in which he runs through the woods. A few moments later, he finds himself in a hospital bed with a monstrous, fanged face. When David wakes up, he frantically tells Hirsch about his vivid dreams, but the doctor assumes it is the result of his psychological trauma and assures him that everything is fine. David says that he doesn't want to be alone as he's scared, so the doctor promises to send someone to stay with him. In the evening, we see David accompanied by Alex, who is reading a book at his bedside. He then tells her that she's very beautiful, causing her to blush. Soon after, he falls asleep and has another nightmare about a group of wolf men wearing Nazi uniforms. These men slaughter his family and set fire to his home in front of his eyes before slitting his throat. At this moment, David awakens and informs Alex that he just had a nightmare. Thinking that he's feeling uneasy, she goes to open the curtains, but is suddenly stabbed by one of the Nazi demons. David freaks out at the sight, but he soon wakes up and realizes it was just another nightmare. The next morning, while having breakfast, David is visited by the ghost of Jack, whose face has been completely mauled. David believes it is just another nightmare, but Jack insists that he is actually here. He apologizes for disturbing him with his presence, but explains that he was forced to come to warn him. He tells David that they were attacked by a werewolf known as a lycanthrope. Since David was bitten, he will turn into a werewolf during the next full moon, which is in 2 days. As for Jack, he is cursed to walk the earth in limbo, neither dead nor alive, until the wolf's bloodline is severed. He says that David would be the last werewolf, as he has inherited the curse of his attacker. Jack now wants his friend to unalive himself to end the werewolf curse and prevent more people from becoming potential victims. However, David thinks he's just hallucinating and refuses to believe what Jack said. Plus, the nurse is hot and he thinks he's got a shot. He begins to call out for Alex, and when she arrives, Jack disappears. David then kisses Alex and tells her how Jack had just visited him and said all these things. However, she reassures him that he was probably just dreaming again. The next day, David is released from the hospital, and Alex takes him to her apartment. Now that's service. When they arrive, she clarifies that she doesn't usually bring men home like this, but she admits to being attracted to him. We then see the two of them showering together and spending the afternoon making love. Later that night, when David gets up to use the restroom, he's startled by Jack's ghost in the mirror. The guy appears to be even more decayed than yesterday. They then head to the living room to talk, but David still believes Jack isn't real. However, his friend reminds him that tomorrow is the full moon and urges him to off himself while he still can. Moments later, Alex enters the room, causing Jack to vanish once more. The next day, Dr. Hirsch travels to the slaughtered lamb to check if David's really telling him the truth. As he walks into the pub, the locals fall silent again and stare at him. Hirsch tries to engage them in conversation, inquiring about the incident involving the 2 American boys. However, the pub-goers deny knowing anything about it and claim they never saw the boys. This disappoints the doctor and he proceeds to leave, but a young guy approaches him on the way out. He reveals that the boys were undoubtedly attacked by wolves and people around David are in danger. He tries to reveal more, but an elderly villager appears and scolds him, causing the young man to flee. In the evening, David is alone in the apartment while Alex is at work. He tries to pass the time by watching TV, but his body begins to burn, causing him to scream in pain. Moments later, thick hair grows all over his body, sharp claws emerge from his hands, and fangs protrude from his mouth. Some of the best prosthetics work the world has ever seen. David eventually transforms into a werewolf under the light of the full moon. Following this, he roams the streets of London in search of victims. He soon runs into a couple who are on their way to a dinner invitation at a friend's house. They plan to enter through the back door to surprise their friends, but unfortunately, the werewolf attacks them and brutally tears them apart. Later, David arrives at a junkyard where 3 homeless men and a dog are gathered around a trash can fire. The dog suddenly starts barking aggressively and runs away. Shortly after, the men hear something growling in the distance and ask if someone is there, but before they can figure out what it is, the werewolf leaps onto them and brutally finishes them off. After that, he goes to a subway station and chases a man down an escalator before killing him as well. The scene then cuts to the next morning when David awakens naked in a zoo. Yeah, seeing the red pandas will do crazy things to you. Caged with wolves. He is taken aback by his situation and has no memory of what happened the night before. He then climbs over the fence and escapes the place. To cover himself, he takes a bunch of balloons from a child and later steals a woman's coat. And Pennywise thought he had scary things to show children. Meanwhile, Dr. Hirsch reads a newspaper article about the brutal deaths of 6 people the previous night. Shortly after, David returns to Alex's apartment and tells her how he mysteriously woke up in a zoo this morning, but Alex doesn't think much of it, assuming he's just having vivid nightmares again. While they are talking, she receives a phone call from Dr. Hirsch, who expresses concern about David's condition and wants to check on how he's doing. He requests that she bring David to the hospital, to which Alex agrees. Later, as they are traveling in a taxi, David feels unusually energized and tells Alex that he has not felt so good in years. Their conversation is interrupted by the cabbie, who mentions the news about 6 people killed the previous night. Upon hearing this, David's mood suddenly changes, and he realizes that his friend was correct. He assumes that he's responsible for the killings, and immediately gets out of the cab. David then approaches a nearby police officer, confesses to killing 6 people, and wishes to be arrested. But the officer doesn't believe him and refuses to arrest him without reason. This disappoints David, so he approaches Alex and kisses her. He says that he loves her a lot, but must stay away from her for her own safety. Alex is confused by what he means, but David doesn't care to explain and simply runs away. Next, David tries to cut his wrists with a pocket knife, but he feels scared and can't bring himself to do it. He then notices Jack in the distance, who now looks almost like a skeleton. David follows his friend to a porno theater, where he meets the ghosts of the 6 victims who were murdered the night before. They all loved porno. They all try to convince him to end himself using quick and painless methods, such as shooting himself in the mouth or throwing himself under a train. However, David has no idea how he would do such a daunting task. Moments later, the full moon reappears, and David, who still lacks the courage to end his life, transforms into a werewolf once more. The ghosts of his victims vanish, and David begins to slaughter the people inside the theater. Soon after, several officers arrive at the scene, but the werewolf has already escaped at this point. He then begins terrorizing the streets of London by attacking people and causing violent accidents. When an officer attempts to restrain him, the werewolf casually bites his head off. This causes the city to descend into chaos as people begin to panic and flee for their lives. Meanwhile, Alex is sleeping when she is approached by Dr. Hirsch, who tells her about the commotion. They both assume that David must be responsible for this chaos and decide to head towards the location together. When they arrive, they discover that werewolf David has somehow become trapped in a dead-end alley with no way out. Several police cars have barricaded the area, and officers are working to keep onlookers at a safe distance. In the final scene, Alex pushes through the officers to reach the alley, where she finds the werewolf. She tearfully tells David that the cops are going to kill him and begs him to stop his rampage. She also confesses that she loves him. Boy, he must have been great in the sack. And for a moment, the werewolf seems to understand this sentiment. He looks at her with affection, but quickly succumbs to his animal instincts and snarls at her. Seeing this, the officers wasted no time in shooting him to death. As the movie ends, David reverts to his human form and dies in front of Alex, but his expression is serene since he's finally freed from the curse. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.